Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, and now it's time to discuss the one fight this weekend that I think most people woke up talking about the following morning.
Yeah, I know.
The fight between what was the WBA welterweight champion Keith Thurman and the all-time great Manny Pacquiao. Let's talk about it. You know, my initial interpretation of this fight was that this is a fight where you could pick either guy to win, and there's a credible argument for either guy on both sides of it. For the people that picked Manny Pacquiao to win this thing, you know, what might have provoked them to pick Manny is that Keith Thurman might have been taking this fight for all the wrong reasons. That Keith might have looked at Manny as an easy win because he's an aging fighter. But he's an aging fighter with a lot of marquee value. So Keith, you know, he may end up getting surprised by Manny because he's underestimating Manny. He's fighting him for all the wrong reasons. That might have provoked some people out there to pick Manny to win this thing. In turn, for those like myself who picked Keith to win on points, the reasoning behind that was simple. The guys that Manny had been fighting leading up to this fight, you know, a faded Lucas Matthysse, who was so obviously at the end of his career, an economic Adrian Broner, who is notorious for not throwing enough punches throughout the course of a fight, that Pacquiao might have bounced back.
Them two dudes.
Fighting those two guys, you understand. But fighting those two guys and beating those two guys, that doesn't exactly communicate that Manny Pacquiao is on the level, because those two guys, at that point in the juncture, they're tailor-made for him. Whereas what he would be facing in Keith Thurman would be a different set of challenges. A different set of challenges that those two guys don't pose. Because, you know, Keith Thurman, he does have a good set of legs. He is the undefeated, younger fighter in the fight. So this might actually have been the fight to where Manny's age finally caught up to him and finally showed up. We saw a glimmer of that in the Jeff Horn fight, you understand, that whether you think Manny won or you think Manny lost, he looked his age in the fight.
In that fight he did.
So the rhyme and the reason kind of was that if Jeff Horn can make Manny look his age, even for a little while, maybe Keith Thurman could do a little better. And it would seem that that was the wrong assumption, that was the wrong prediction.
You think?
Manny Pacquiao, at the age of 40, showed up and showed out on Saturday night. Let's get down to brass tacks. What won Manny Pacquiao this fight? I do think that some part of what won Manny this fight is that Keith underestimated him. I do think that. I think that had something to do with it. I don't think that Keith figured that Manny's trademark bounce, his awkward angles, his hand speed, or what's left of it, because, you know, Manny's just not as fast as he used to be, but he's fast enough to surprise Keith. And I think that these things, you know, the element of surprise, that Keith Thurman underestimated Manny Pacquiao, I think that had its role to play and why Manny was able to go in there and shock this guy. Think about it this way. Nobody really envisioned that from the opening round, Manny Pacquiao would close it out by dropping Keith Thurman. I didn't see anybody saying that. And you can just imagine how Keith Thurman might have felt being put down in the opening round by what is the aging fighter. The guy who, you know, you're supposed to be able to box circles around. You said you were going to retire the guy, but he starts off the fight by dropping you. Just imagine what kind of effect that could have on a fighter's demeanor in Keith Thurman's situation. We often talk about the effect that those early knockdowns can have on a fighter's demeanor, because from that moment on, that fighter realizes that he can be hurt by the other guy, and that thereby affects his implementation and his willingness to engage.
You better be careful.
For Keith Thurman, that message was delivered early. That message was delivered from the first round on. I mean, as far as being physically hurt, I do think that Keith physically recovered from the shot, went on to pick up some rounds of his own, but psychologically, understand, from a mental perspective, it has to have done something to Keith's demeanor towards Manny Pacquiao to be put down by the guy who you were saying you were going to retire, who you were saying you always viewed as being beatable, quote unquote. I mean, these are things that Keith Thurman said in the build-up for this fight. So I gather that, you know, being put down so early, at least psychologically, it had to do something to Keith Thurman. We think about the overall condition of the fighters comparative to each other. You know, who was able to give the better shot and who was able to take the better shot. And on both counts, I'd have to say that from the look of it, it looked like Manny Pacquiao was the more solid guy in the ring than Keith Thurman. You think about every time that Manny landed a clean shot, upstairs or downstairs, and it visibly rattled Keith Thurman's cage. Whereas, comparatively, Keith landed a number of power punches of his own, but Manny Pacquiao was able to weather them pretty good. He took the shots well. He didn't seem the least bit bothered by it. At no point in this fight did you get the impression that Manny is either running out of steam, or he's hurt, or he's in trouble. I mean, nothing,
Cool as a cucumber.
For Christ's sakes, at one point in the fight, he's doing the Ali Shuffle. One thing that dawned on me post-fight is how, scoring the fight, what you've got on paper and what you were actually looking at, the fight's aesthetic, they did seem like two different things. Myself, on my card, as I was scoring the fight, I had it about 6 rounds to 6 in favor of Manny Pacquiao due to the knockdown. The knockdown is what put Manny over the top for me. That's really what won him the fight. But, that's on paper. It seems more competitive than it looks on paper, because if you're looking at the fight, Manny Pacquiao is very much poised, relaxed, controlled, doesn't look in trouble. He's not the least bit bothered by what's going on with Thurman. I mean, it's not like Keith Thurman wasn't landing punches of his own, getting off combinations of his own. You understand? I mean, he really was. On paper, whether you're looking at how many rounds Keith Thurman may have picked up, or you're looking at the punch stats, that, Keith Thurman, he wasn't economic. He was in this fight. He was throwing punches. He was landing punches. When you look at those things and compare them with the overall aesthetic of the fight itself, how the fight looks...
in real time.
Manny did still appear to be the ring general. I mean, if nothing else, he looked right at home. In there against a fighter who's, 10 years younger than he is? It's with these things in mind that I feel like there were two principal reasons that Keith Thurman lost this fight. One being that he did underestimate Manny Pacquiao, which we talked about, that, from where Keith Thurman was sitting, Manny may have appeared to be low-hanging fruit. But that backfired, It backfired. But in terms of why it backfired, it's because of reason number 2. Keith Thurman's competitive edge, his drive as a fighter, as an athlete, has waned and dissipated. He was put in a situation where he was squaring off against a 40-year-old fighter, and as it turns out, the 40-year-old fighter wanted it more. He wanted to win more than the young guy. Now take your time with that one and give it a second to really register, to really process what I'm about to say. That Manny Pacquiao is arguably the most decorated active fighter in the sport of boxing. This guy has fought in 8 weight classes, fought numerous champions, numerous top contenders, been there and done that. This is a fighter that has very little left to prove. And yet, that fighter who has been there and done that several times over, that fighter still has more of a competitive drive than a guy who hasn't accomplished half as much as he has. That a guy with nothing to prove wants to win more than a guy who still has question marks.
And everything to prove.
Ladies and gentlemen, that denotes what I'm talking about, what I've been talking about in several videos, that Keith Thurman is really not a competitor at this point. That competitive drive and will to win has all but gone. It could be that at some point in that, close to 2-year hiatus that Keith Thurman was away from the ring, it could be that that's where it evaporated, that that's where everything went south, that the time away really hurt him and he did not come back the same guy. I've touched on this in previous videos. I mean, think about it this way. Had Keith Thurman won on Saturday night, had he got the decision, you know that this guy had no intentions of returning to the ring anytime this year? Do you know that? He planned on taking another vacation. I mean, process that for a second, okay? This is a guy who spent, 22, 23 months away? You're just now coming back this year. You fought Lopez. You didn't look too good. Assuming you would have beat Manny Pacquiao, you're saying that you were prepared to spend the rest of the year away from the ring? You can't even have a little tune-up fight? Little gimme fight to keep the tools sharp? It appears to me that Keith Thurman, more and more, was a guy who just really doesn't want to be there. And if he took this Pacquiao fight, it really isn't because he viewed Pacquiao as being one of the best or still being one of the best. He only took it because he viewed Manny as low-hanging fruit. He thought it was going to be easy because Manny's getting older. And he was wrong. Karma has very much come to bite him in the ass. Now I know that some of you out there might be listening to this and thinking to yourselves, well, hold on a second, Mr. Relay. Hold on a second, Mr. Ring IQ. If you already had a low opinion of Keith Thurman, if you already made all these anecdotes and you can prove it before the fight, then why on earth did you pick him to win? And that's a fair question. I can understand where that question is coming from. The answer to that question is, I didn't pick Keith Thurman to win because I think Keith Thurman is great. I didn't pick Keith Thurman because I think he's fantastic and he's this amazing fighter. No, the only reason that I picked Keith Thurman in a situation where I said I feel there's a good argument on either side for either guy to win. But the only reason I picked Keith is because I can't trust a 40-year-old fighter. A 40-year-old fighter can go from looking amazing, like he's still got it, to looking like he needs the Bengay and the Geritol inside of 2 fights. He might look amazing in one fight and then look old in the next. Kinda like how, Manny looked good against Tim Bradley in the rubber match, and he looked good against Jesse Vargas when he won the WBO title. Did you guys forget that he did that? He beat Jesse Vargas, and he beat him decisively. But he goes in there against Jeff Horn, a guy who he's widely favored to beat, a guy who was described as a cherry pick, and what does he do? He languishes. He looks his age. You rewind the clocks a little bit.
Open your mind.
Think about what led up to the Jeff Horn fight, okay? Manny Pacquiao, he loses to Floyd Mayweather. He's coming off a loss. He fights Tim Bradley in a rubber match. He then fights Jesse Vargas for the WBO title. He has 2 fights in between the Mayweather fight and the Jeff Horn fight. Now, what happened in the Jeff Horn fight? Manny's age showed up. Whether you think he won or you think he was robbed, one way or another, that's a fight where he languished. He languished far more with Jeff Horn than he did with either Jesse Vargas or Tim Bradley. So I think about that, okay, well, he had 2 fights before that Jeff Horn fight, and ahead of this fight, he's had 2 fights. He's had the fight with Lucas Mathise, the fight with Adrian Broner, and those were both fights where the safe bet was Manny. The both of those fights. So he's had 2 fights, the same way he had 2 fights before the Jeff Horn fight. He's had 2 fights ahead of the Keith Thurman fight, and I figure that, you know what? If Jeff Horn could have made Manny languish, could have made him look his age, it's a fair assumption that Keith Thurman could do a little better. Even though I don't view Keith as being that much of a competitor anymore, I don't view him as being a young, hungry fighter, rather a fat and happy champion. In spite of that, I see the pattern. So based on that pattern and those logistics, I decided to go with Keith Thurman. But I reiterate, it's not because I have a high opinion of Keith Thurman, because anybody who follows this channel knows that I don't. I've said it many times in previous videos, and I'll leave the links to those videos in the description box, that, I just don't view Keith as a hungry fighter anymore. Whatever hunger he used to have, it has been satiated by what nominal success he's garnered so far, that he just doesn't seem like a competitor. He's more of an opportunist these days than an athlete. And it really took for Manny Pacquiao to go in there and beat him the way that he did to prove it to me. That's what it took. It's going to take for Manny to go in there and beat Keith Thurman to prove, 1, that Manny is still on the level, that he's still no pushover, he's nobody's patsy, and 2, it's going to take for Manny to beat Keith to prove that Keith is not a hungry fighter anymore. Because now you're at the point to where a guy who has nothing to prove is still willing to prove more than you are, willing to take more risks than you are. It's going to take for him to beat you to prove it. Because up until this point,
It was just an opinion.
that was just an anecdote. That was just an opinion that I expressed. Manny going in there and beating him the way that he did proves to me that Keith Thurman, that this guy, he's not a competitor anymore. He's an opportunist. You give an inch in the sport of boxing. You give an inch of complacency, an inch of quit, and that is the inch that can cost you the fight. That is the inch that I think Keith Thurman gave up to Manny Pacquiao, who wanted it more than he did. Manny Pacquiao effectively proved to me 2 things on Saturday night in his fight with Keith Thurman. One of those things is that even today, he is still hungrier than some of these young guys running around with belts. That's what he proved, that he wanted it more. And he wanted it so much more that he was able to wrestle that belt away from what is an undefeated fighter, an undefeated champion. He proved that. And he also proved that his success is not limited to clever matchmaking, smoke and mirrors, fighting tailor-made opponents that are made for him to order. His success is not limited to that. That he's still out there, he's still getting the job done. At a time when he's 40 years old, he got nothing to prove to nobody, but he can still fucking do it. That's what Manny Pacquiao proved to me. And this allows me to segue into the next phase of the conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no other fighter out there right now. No other active fighter is as proven, as tested, as tempered,
Then Manny.
as decorated as Manny Pacquiao. This guy's track record trumps that of any other fighter ranked on any other pound-for-pound list out there, whether it's Transnational, BoxRec, Ring Magazine, ESPN, or even the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. There is no fighter ranked on that list with the kind of a track record that Manny Pacquiao has. Comparatively, he's done things that these guys have yet to do and some things that they probably never will do. It's just a matter of fact. But what happened on Saturday was the game changer. That now Manny Pacquiao stands once again as a world champion. And given his track record, everything he's done so far, everything he's proven so far, and what he managed to prove on Saturday night, Manny Pacquiao emerges as the number one pound-for-pound fighter on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. Oh, you may be wondering what the rhyme and the reason is, but those of you that follow this channel already know how this list works. You already understand that the governing criteria rates the accomplishments of the fighters against each other, with the most accomplished fighter rising to the top. And the only reason that a fighter as accomplished as Manny Pacquiao wasn't on this list is because Manny was not in possession of a full-fledged world title. That was the missing ingredient. That's what Manny needed to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt, beyond the shadow of an anecdote, that he is still on the level. He may not be the same fighter that he used to be, but what he has put forth throughout his entire career, I mean, think of the checklist. Titles held, titles unified, quality of competition, divisions climbed. These are all areas where Manny Pacquiao checks off, more so than anyone else on this list. All he needed was the world title to get on, and now that he's got it, there's no argument that you could make against him, at least not based on this governing criteria. Ladies and gents, there are several pound-for-pound lists out there. They all work in different ways. They all have their governing criteria, but this is mine. We use this itemized list to measure these fighters against each other, with the most accomplished fighter of anyone on the list rising to the very top. And as it stands today, there is no active fighter, no active champion in the sport of boxing that is as accomplished as Manny Pacquiao. That's what warrants the consideration. I mean, if you have any questions, ask yourself this. All these guys that are ranked behind Manny Pacquiao, do you think they are going to still be collecting world titles from guys that are 10 years younger than they are when they're 40?
Do ya?
Do you think that they're all going to do that?
Do ya?
You know what the answer to that question is.
Don't beat around the bush.
And what we know with an absolute certitude is that while that may be up for debate and speculation when it comes to those fighters, when it comes to Manny, it is simply a matter of fact. He stands today as a world champion once again. That's what warrants the consideration for him to not only be reintegrated into the list,
He's back.
but sit atop it. Because, quite honestly, given everything that he's already done, his track record, that's already saying a mouthful. But the fact that he's still here, winning world titles at this age, that proves it. You'd have to be the number one guy to be able to wrestle titles away from young undefeated fighters when you're 40 years old. You'd have to be the number one guy to be able to do that.